So yeah, why I'll be a bit boring and reading because apart from philosophy, I also have background in classics, which was a department. It was still Yugoslavia back then. And departments of classics were usually part of the philosophy departments, not philology. It was very interdisciplinary. One could choose even tracks of specialization, and my tracks were philosophy, ancient philosophy, and yeah, linguistics. And the fifth year, we used to study for 5 years. They really took classics very seriously in Yugoslavia. Okay, it wasn't Yugoslavia anymore when I graduated, but when I started, I was 17, it still was. Yeah, and even though dealing mostly with contemporary topics as I was progressing with my education and career, I would revisit the classics and the Greeks always. So here I'm reading from a draft that I prepared for that book that we talked about yesterday with Paul, Defending Materialism, the uneasy history of the atom that the three of us worked on for more than 2 years, I think. It was published by Bloomsbury Academic UK in November 24. So my contribution there is primarily relying on my knowledge, perhaps nowadays a bit limited, of classics, of ancient Greek. It's to a degree inspired by the fact that my graduation thesis was on the translation of usia by the term in Aristotle's Organon, a translation into a Slavic language. It was called South Slavic languages. So anyway, I will draw on that, but actually the background of this entire talk is something that is not so obviously visible, but it's there somewhere, like in John's lecture this morning. Laruelle and the beginning of philosophy and non-philosophy, the problem of the being or being in philosophy, or to on in Parmenides. And how come it all begins, and the perennial, never resolved problem of philosophy dealing with itself and this entrapment of narcissistic fixation on itself, dealing with itself and but with itself, even when paradoxically admitting that there is no way of discovering any form of truth, be it external, some sort of outsideness, or internal, some sort of a Cartesian truth, even when, as Laruelle would say, philosophy, especially post-structuralist philosophy, admits this paradox, admits the split, admits the impossibility, the equation is still assumed. What we discover and what we become fascinated by is the fact that, well, we live in a paradox. We just imagine, we cannot grasp, we cannot fully encompass truth, we cannot embody truth in a way. So what Laruelle discovers as a problem, and he starts his entire treatise there in philosophy and non-philosophy, about the concept itself, the birth of the concept itself, to on, is that this sort of meaningless thing. Okay, I don't know how to switch off the WhatsApp group now here. Harry, hi, I can see you. Nobody's looking at the screen. Okay. I'm receiving WhatsApp messages in the PHYSIS group. Okay. Okay, so yeah, where was I? Yeah, the problem of the concept of to on. So what we have there is a linguistic category, a verb. It is something that does not need to exist in every language. It happens to exist in most of the Indo-European languages. It happens to exist in Greek. So out of is, enai, my pronunciation is ancient Greek, sorry. Where is Alexandra? Yeah, Ina, Tora Ina, but in classical Greece is Ina, right? Right? Okay. So out of that, uh, an entity, again, entity ends, it's the same as tone or ina or to be, an entity, a thing, and the thing is in philosophy and for philosophy and for the Western rational thought, history of rational thought, or what thought, or what purports to be rational thought, has been born. This out of this thing, the concept of tone, being has been born. The problem there is, according to Laruelle, that being is a unity of truth or thought, or what seeks to become truth, and the real. To Laruelle, the real is foreclosed, but not in the Lacanian sense of fetishizing and being super fascinated by this foreclosure, and let's just be amazed by how paradoxically we exist with regard to this or due to this foreclosure of the real. No, to him, the real is foreclosed as it is foreclosed to the scientists. And this is what he calls the scientific posture of thought. So you admit the ultimate inaccessibility of the real, or outsideness, in a way. We can call it that, some sort of externality, external reality. And you are satisfied with some sort of correlation, approximation of whatever manifests itself to be the real, or you experience it as a manifestation of the real, some sort of real, some sort of outness, some sort of poking outsideness that you need to understand, and through understanding, kind of domesticate, control whatever the motive of the sciences are to explain the outside reality. So to him, this is the problem. And whenever, for him, this is the problem, more to him, this is the problem of philosophy. Whenever he is accused of reductionism of philosophy to just, it's not the same, it's not the monolithic, a monolithic thing. This is a varied, rich history of ideas. Yes, it is, but each strand of philosophy, there is no school of thought that hasn't contained this problem of, as he calls it, decisionism of philosophy. You kind of decide in advance what is real, and then you dance around it, and the real is supposed to be somehow squeezed into this form of what you purport to be real. So we have a Deleuzian truth, we have Lacanian truth, we have this type of. He says, no, you've got, you don't have that, and you don't have the support of philosophy and some sort of a tradition, philosophical tradition, that would keep you safe in your search of what is real out there, and whatever real or realness of whatever phenomenon you want to study. But the problem with Laruelle is he never opens the question, or ventures the discussion of that, of the possibility that we might want to discuss certain concrete instantiations of the real. He always speaks very abstractly of the real, and that's why it's not obvious that the concept of the real with him is more of a epistemological category or some sort of a modus or tropos in the Aristotelian categorical system than a substance. This is how this is similar to Lacan, I would say, because everything can have an aspect of the real, but also of the symbolic. Anyway, going back to the problem of decisionism and of this, as he calls it, thetic form of thought. No, actually, he proposes non-thetic form of thought, but he does not call it explicitly thetic. The concept of tone and the principle of thinking philosophically. Now, I'm assuming that I kind of explained what the problem with tone and with ontology sees well in the entire history of philosophy, and why he seems to think that he can apply it to any tradition. So I wanted to give this, present this as a sort of a background of what I'm going to talk about, but I'm not going to discuss Laruelle. But I think that that's a good illustration that Laruelle can be useful, can be applied. He is not somebody, and his work is not intended to mystify things. Quite to the contrary, and I think that John's lecture today demonstrated there was so much Laruelle there in the background. For those who know, so yeah, Laruelle works. Anyway, let's return to tone, the birth of tone, and to Parmenides. And this was written for a book that primarily deals with Marx and Marx's, Marx. Even though we discussed the concept of mechanistic materialism in sciences, etc., the thread that unifies all of the subjects and topics and the objects of interest and the mathematicians we discussed there, or rather they discussed there, I read, because I am not from that field, the computer scientists, etc., the physicists who discussed a lot of physics, I believe, in that book. So all of that is read through the lens of Marx and this Marxian materialism, which we argue is mechanistic. And we insist that there is nothing wrong about things being mechanistic. Actually, the assumption that things are this is also organic. They can also be organic, but that doesn't mean that there is no mechanical process of sorts in the background. There is nothing demeaning in that. Actually, there is an idealist expectation. If you would look down on to these processes of crude material, connection, clocks connecting together, or for example, take sociolinguistic linguistic. How does it work? It's purely mechanistic, like this vowel goes with this consonant in a situation when there is another vowel in combination with this consonant, then we get this group of consonants or vowels. It's pure mechanics. And then you get this beautiful structuralist foreground for theory, for everything. But it begins with that sort of mechanistic explanation of what language is. So we argue that Marxist method is very similar, actually, and his treatment of the empirical material that you can touch, describe, the procedure in Capital is very similar. It's very mechanistic. He describes, I don't know, how the prices are formed, and then I don't know, these long passages of prices of silk and wheat and I don't know what not, and then he comes up with a formula of surplus value. So the process is the same, the procedure is the same. So this is an argument here, and we argue obviously that reality itself probably operates in a similar way, or we don't know. This is the way that works for us in explaining reality, and there is nothing wrong with it. And our argument there is that this is actually materialism that we are sure is rid of idealism. And if we wanted rid of idealism, we wanted rid of philosophy. Well, this was Marx's ambition as well. Now, my argument there is that we may rid it of philosophy, or its problematic aspects that I insist here are synchronistic. They exist throughout millennia. Like this principle of philosophical sufficiency, that what I was explaining at the beginning is also called bilateral principle of philosophical sufficiency. We can maybe read it of that, but what's left there is then objects or material objects of thought, transcendental objects. John hinted to this type of objects this morning in the lecture, or something else. Actually, that something else is always among the objects. This is my argument. I mean, this is something I think I can dig out of Laurel, and that is the metaphysical form of thought. To me, or I do not have an issue with metaphysics, actually. I have an issue with philosophy as metaphysics or metaphysics as philosophy. Then it's tyrannical, then it precludes any freedom of thought. But metaphysical questions are questions that children ask. Metaphysical questions are questions that scientists ask. It's how you treat them, what you do with these questions, that makes you a problematic metaphysician. So I think that even Marx was wrong there to pursue this, solution of, reading thought of metaphysics. I don't know, maybe metaphysics isn't the problem. Okay, he also wanted to read his science of human being, vicious being of humanity. He also wanted to read it of philosophy as well, but metaphysics was purportedly the problem. To me, there is something to it that is useful, that moves thought, including scientific thought, arts, any type of techne. I use the term techne in the original sense. So it can be art, it can be technology, it can be skill, it can be the art of arguing, of logic, of logical arguing. It's also called techne. Then Aristotle's rhetoric. So finally, I start with the paper. I know. Just stop me when when the time is up. Okay, so let's go to Parmenides finally. But I think that this lens was necessary so that Thomas doesn't ask me why do I need to. Yes, ask someone something like that. What do you need this for? Whom did you ask? I forget. Okay, so this is why I did this. Yeah, and you cited here. Okay. So you should place yourself in a context. Okay, just joking. Okay, so we go to Parmenides, and I would say uh, the problem he posed are something that is plaguing Western philosophy and uh, and Western rational thought even to this day. Uh, we still sort of solve Zeno's paradox. Uh, Zeno is an Eleatic, just like Parmenides. I will propose something as a solution, which is not a mathematical solution. There is paradox. It's an atomistic solution. I don't know if it will make sense to you, but I will try. And yeah, the principle that Parmenides came up with, nothing comes from nothing, is still very much the rule, right? So this principle, now we will talk about the problem as to how, hello, John. Uh, we'll talk about yeah, how this principle of nothing comes from nothing was treated in Greek philosophical antiquity, and I would say it still poses a similar type of problems for philosophy and would still be as difficult to solve or bypass had there not been for the discovery of physics and other sciences who have just taught us that we have to come up with a solution to this problem because obviously there is change, obviously there is movement, obviously Parmenides is wrong. But how do we go about the problem that he poses? And we will still agree with it that nothing comes from nothing. Nothing comes from nothing, then there is no movement. There's no movement because there is no empty space. You remember the whole trap that Parmenides set up. So this principle was accepted by the pre-Socratics and even by those who argued that, and those are, a lonely bunch of people, the atomists. So even by those who argued that change and movement were possible. So in the Eleatic system, I will have to focus on the writing because there are many quotes here. So in the Eleatic system, so Parmenides, Zeno, and the rest of them, unchallenged till Aristotle, because even the atomists, the pre-Socratic ones, kind of tried to work around Parmenides. Nothing comes from nothing meant change was impossible. Empty space didn't exist, and everything had always existed because there is no empty space. If there is empty space, that implies that there is nothingness. Everything had always existed in solid and unchangeable form. Empty space meant nothingness in the ontological sense. So here is plural in the background. So empty space is not just a space, not a function or a category. What is the correct term in physics? But it has some particular role there. It's not the essence of everything, it's just space. It's exactly something similar to what Aristotle attributed to space and time. It's modus, it's tropos, it's how things happen. It's not the what, but space and empty space is ontologized since Parmenides, and nothing. And here is the problem. So we choose a principle and we create an ontological foundation, and then everything is that. Uh, Okay, so nothing comes from nothing meant blah blah blah. So empty space meant nothingness in the ontological sense, and that is the problem. I just explained why. Whereas movement implied coming into being in the again in the ontological sense. So if it's coming into being in the ontological sense, we are breaching the law of nothing comes from nothing. So again, Parmenides is supposed to be correct. Whereas movement implied coming into being in the ontological sense, argued in terms of ontology instead of physical philosophy, as it was called back then. So movement was taken to be becoming enousia. So you see, movement, which is something that has to do with tropoi, with modi, with time and space, with the how, as Aristotle would say, that is turned into ousia, into substance or essence. So another interesting thing, ousia, essence or substance, is the not just the definition, but the true being of being. Right? So look at this layers of tautology. So uh, this is something Laurel insists that you can find in any form of philosophy. So here is the problem, according to you. Okay, let's not go into that direction. So movement was taken to be becoming, as I said an ousia, or an essence or substance, which contradicts the principle that essence is of indestructible, everlasting nature, which is again the law, the truth, etc., proclaimed by Parmenides and never really disputed seriously by anybody in antiquity, even later on in philosophy. It's the scientists who have challenged this without too much worry as to how it will destabilize the ontological vision of the universe we have. If it works, it works. So movement was taken to be becoming an ousia, an essence substance, which contradicts the principle that essence is of indestructible, everlasting nature. And it is of indestructible, everlasting nature because the essence of being, that being, all-encompassing being, must be everlasting. If it's changeable, transformable, if it mutates and moves, then it's not the truth. So you see how easily you slide into, it's almost impossible not to end up at Plato and his ideas. So, empty space meant nothingness in the ontological sense, whereas okay, I read that part. Movement was taken to be becoming, I said that part, and has thus always existed. Okay, the idea of change violates the principal premise, an axiom or the axiom of the Eleatics. Nothing is not. Nothingness does not exist, and therefore becoming would mean, and thus, I can't believe they published this with the typo. Yeah, I don't know what was supposed to be there, but I know what I mean. So nothingness does not exist, and becoming would therefore imply that something is taking up the space that was previously empty, and nothing can be previously empty because then nothingness would be a possibility. nothingness, non-being, and empty space or void in the absolute sense are equated in Parmenides and continue to be so throughout antiquity, with some exceptional examples of direct confrontation with this logic. And this confrontation is very cautious in the atomists and more systematic and in a way more direct in Aristotle. So the category of space is treated by the natural philosophy of that era, and then of sciences in the centuries to follow, as something absent from the Parmenidean reasoning, as well as from the reasoning of those who opposed it in Greek antiquity, but never challenged the principle and the equation here at issue. So, namely, that empty space equals nothingness in the ontological sense. That was never questioned. It was questioned indirectly, very not in, I would say it's a direct critique actually, because what Aristotle proposes is a correction of how things are put. So Aristotle says the following: ousia is something which is toti, a thing, something, or a what, something that can be replaced or responded to by a noun, let's put it that way. Also, the notion of ousia is grounded in multiplicity in Aristotle. We keep thinking about the unmoved mover, and we're fixated on that, and hence Aristotle is perceived as also, in a way, an idealist, just like Plato, but the unmoved mover is there so that there is some possibility to talk about movement. That's one thing. The other thing is that he subjects this reasoning to categorical or logical scrutiny, or what he calls let's say an investigation is I will describe it an investigation to the validity of how the argument is formulated, so how logical it is. But he's calling this practice also techne, which is interesting. The techne of arguing theologically, not logically, theological. So, to quote Aristotle in physics, he says, there is no such thing as motion above and over and above the things. It is always with respect to substance, so with respect to ousia, or to quantity, or to quality, or to place. That what changes. Aristotle carries out a sort of a quasi-Kantian, I would say, like critique of pure reason in antiquity, division between pure reason and noumena. The limits and conditions of reasoning are sought for within the very possibility of language. So rhetoric, logic, the sciences of analysis, and the understanding of syllogism are the result of further precision and formalization of everyday language. This is also very important because he uses everyday language, like, for example, matter is stuff, like, right? Like, hule, and hule is like stuff that you, wood that you build from. So everything is descriptive, but very precise, and becomes further and further formalized through ever greater precision and extraction of that which is abstract or can be extracted as the abstract mold of what is being discussed there as matter or materiality at hand. So that said, Aristotle seems to argue thought throughout his opus, actually, because I found a bunch of other quotes, that the subject of human knowledge has preferred its conceptual tools, it has perfected, sorry, what I just explained, its conceptual tools serving to explain the outside reality. So it's about explaining an outside reality. Nonetheless, the two are radically different things, governed by their immanent laws, even in Aristotle. This is interesting. That is why an ousia is of something, a certain what, to ti in Greek, and is always spoken of in many. I'm quoting Aristotle. So it's always about multiplicity. There is not one ousia, just as there is not one toon, which is another provocation to Parmenides' being and to his toon, and then this argument about ousia that is also spoken of many. So many things, all things have ousia. So there is not one ousia out there that we can ontologize in the sense of produce an ontological foundation and foregrounding for everything existing. I love Deleuze, but difference, everything is, okay, difference within is Derrida, I pronounced it wrong maybe, but the difference and repetition, that difference. So everything is that sort of. So we have it even now in Deleuze. Anyways, it is of this reason that we liken Aristotle's it's like we, the collective of authors, but this is my chapter. So I liken Aristotle's contribution to the development of philosophical and scientific thought to that of Kant. Furthermore, I would argue that it is also a proto-scientific breaking away from the authority of metaphysics in the problematic sense, so breaking away from ontology, by virtue of employing formal reasoning and also invoking the authority of empirical proof and experimentation. So all of this is new, and all of this is something the others do not do, except for the atomists. So from Parmenides to the late atomists, and with a significant aberration from the dogma with Aristotle, as well as throughout antiquity, for there to be movement, there has to be empty space, not filled with or occupied by a body of any sort of or degree. Be it a physical notion of a something, to ti, or an ontological concept such as to on, that is the being of substance, essence, identity of any sort, ousia. To the ancient thinkers, movement is simply an appearance of a thing or an entity at a place where there was nothing prior to it. And this is already an impossibility, right? So it's difficult to argue. So the early atomists, the pre-Socratics, essentially tried to find a way around this. So I'm quoting Melissus here. He says, for the empty is nothing. The space is vacated in an absolute way for only an infinitesimally short moment of time. The possibility of nothingness, thus empty space is allowed, would be allowed in that way. And this is a rule not to be broken. So this is considered a breach of the Parmenidean law, nothing comes from nothing. So we cannot allow even for a tiniest fraction of moment that there is nothingness in any form. Such a you see, if you look at all this from the perspective of contemporary physics, where, the sophism here is actually. So this is considered breach of the Parmenidean, and the problem is that this plagues philosophy to this day. So that is the problem. Short moment of time, the possibility of nothingness, thus empty space would be allowed. So this is not to be allowed. Such a possibility would contradict the utmost truth, the purest tautology of them all. The utmost truth in philosophy is always tautology. Nothing comes from nothing, or being is becoming, or being is being and cannot be not being. This is a quote. That's why it feels weird. That seems to be universally accepted in ancient philosophy, even when problematized. For example, by Aristotle. Even Aristotle accepts this, but tries to find a way around it. But he's dealing with the issue is more direct than that of the early atomists. So, but he uses them. He kind of debates this issue through them. So change is movement too, as it is a matter of becoming, generation, and thus coming to being of something which is apparently not in its essence. So if it's coming to being, then it's not in its essence. Then that would be as if coming out of nothing. So movement is impossible, becoming is impossible. Both are linked, we see in which way. Because space is ontologized. And by ontologized, I mean rendered enousia instead of tropos. A strictly Parmenidean objection to change and thus to becoming or generation would be that if nothing comes from nothing, the being, the on, or the ousia is already there in its absolute form, and thus becoming is precluded. Everything, therefore, has always existed as it ever was, unchanged, unmoved, solid, no crack of empty space or nothingness is allowed. Also, everything is undying. Something cannot be transformed into nothing, since nothing cannot become something. Change is but an illusion. And this is like a consensus. Even in Socrates, one wouldn't expect it of Socrates, but yes, except this is what Plato says, so we don't know. But this is what he says. And what was it, Crito, where he's dying? Yeah. I have the code here, but in the classicist with just with the numbers, so I don't know from which time. 66E to 67A. Okay, this view has persisted as the dominant one well into Neoplatonism, medieval philosophy, and more recently in the neo-rationalist. Peter, now you understand, right? No, I'm talking about Peter Wolfgang.
Oh,
Yes, and the disagreement. And neo-rationalist fetishizing of rationality. So there's the disagreement. That is, of scientific thought as opposed to the manifest image of reality as per Wilfrid Sellars. So we're referring here to a particular reception of Sellars rather than his own writing that admit his own writings that admit continuity between folk reasoning and scientific thought, by the way. We kind of always look at this like an absolute division between the two because we rely, I don't know, out of some sort of inertia on Rebrazier's rendition of Sellars and all like it. There's absolute dichotomy between the two. But in Sellars, there is continuity. Of course, there is a distinction between folk reasoning and scientific or manifest image of reality, but there is also continuity there. But I discussed that in a different paper. Anyway, then that would be a detour to go there now. So the birth of philosophy, of the notion of being, and of perfectly rational thought, which will be tautology again, coincides with the birth of a worldview that declares the immediately experienced reality an illusion. What we immediately experience as reality is an illusion. It coincides with the birth of somatophobia also, as the truth cannot be and does not lie in the visible world, as Socrates says on his deathbed. Oh, me and my sleep. Okay, you know what I mean. It coincides with the birth of somatophobia too, an invisible world without bodies or matter of any sort. Again, Plato, this is from Phaedon. Let us consider the categories of Parmenidean arguments that have marked centuries of millennia of idealism and anti-materialism, and how they form a perfectly circumscribed and impenetrable position. Now, I don't know if I have the time to describe this impenetrable position. I have like 7 more minutes, right? Till when? 5? What? 7, yeah. Well, I don't know if I should stop here because there seems to be some sort of a logical conclusion. Uh, there are people after me? Okay. Okay, but I still have to skip some stuff because it's long. Or just continue as it is, and when we get tired, we'll just stop. So, okay, to this date. So from Newton to Hawkins, this principle, nothing comes from nothing, seems undisputed by the sciences. So even if some of them say that in a way, like something came of nothing, this nothing is still not nothing. It's just zero energy, quantum, whatever. I don't know. I'm improvising. I don't know. Physics. But you know what I mean. So it's still not nothing, neither in the sense of physics nor in the philosophical sense, because it's not nothingness in its absolute. So it seems that philosophy has allowed for more possibilities. The more it has become meditational prose, independent of the sciences, so since the Enlightenment, and maybe, yeah, since the Enlightenment, the more paradoxical positions and those in direct contradiction with science have been permitted. Thus, nothing comes from nothing is not necessarily a matter of universal consensus for modern philosophy anymore. Some philosophers that would convince us that many things come from nothing, or go to nothing. Nothingness in its own right is also being. That is the interesting part. If you Sartre, nothingness is being. The same to on as in Parmenides. I think we will see the problem here. So it seems, and it is an ontological existence according to some philosophers, in particular with the beginning of modernity. Consider existentialism, nihilism, Hegel's notion of non-being, Hegel's dialectic, and the status of non-being or nothingness in logic of sense in English. Yeah. Okay. This absence of heed for the scientific discussions and contempt for the empirical point of to the continuation of the originary division between the visible and the invisible, bodily and incorporeal, and physical and ideal, defining Greek philosophy as noted in the introduction to this paper. So all of this kind of is something we still deal with, including in the context of this uh, techno-idealisms and neo-rationalist techno-fetishizations and singularity absolutes, like Nick Land and I don't know, this bunch of people with a neo-rationalist around him. So interestingly, actually, we are living in times when this philosophy is coinciding with the political economy that rules, right? That's why, Andrew, it's very important not to call it falsely feudalism of any thought, of any kind, because it's more complex. It's a more perverse, destructive form of capitalism. And Nick Land is correct. It's accelerated, but it's capitalism that's accelerated through technology. So, so the same contempt for the physical, the same contempt for the material, the same reduction of the bodily, the animal-like in us humans and all other animals rules there. And all of that should be reduced to resource for technology and the super intellect that will live its own life on its own for itself, in itself and for itself. The artificial general intellect, right? Or whatever that singularity is supposed to be. So philosophy, so we're still there. And philosophy has always been anthropocentric. That is the problem. Even this is anthropocentrism, even though it's predicated on some sort of misanthropy, or contempt for the animals we are, I don't know. So philosophy has always been anthropocentric. And this is a problem that Marx detected in his critique of Hegel's philosophy in general. The title, Critique of Hegel's Philosophy in General. Marx explains there that the absolute spirit is simply the apex of the anthropocentric pretensions of all philosophy since its inception. So even Marx problematizes philosophy. So it's not just the weird Leroy, Marx as well. Philosophy since its inception. It's been anthropocentric, amounting to the notion of the universal egoist. He uses this phrase in this chapter of the manuscript, Critique of Hegel's Philosophy in General. So, okay, let's not go into that. It will be long to describe or summarize that chapter because I'm supposed to conclude soon. So anthropocentrism is embedded also in Feuerbach's materialism. And that is what renders it idealism. Actually, I mean, everybody quotes this thesis on Feuerbach, but I don't know how come we never pay attention to the fact that Marx says there explicitly, what you're doing is still philosophy. And if it's still philosophy, it's still idealism. He literally, okay, he's not talking to Feuerbach directly, like I just paraphrased him, but that is the point. What Feuerbach is doing there is still philosophy. By being still philosophy, it's still idealism. And what betrays it to be philosophy and idealism is the very fact that it is subjectivity centered. It's human subjectivity centered. So now, of course, you would expect, I mean, I would, as a sort of a reflex, object to this pretension that there is objective reality and that some form of objectivism is possible. But Marx argues for, he presents the case for objectivism, or speaking in objective terms, or of objectivity. He postulates a certain type of objectivity, which is not like Kant's objectivity. It's the absolute truth and blah blah blah. This is undisputable. These are the facts, and this is empirically the absolute truth. That would imply a certain position subspicia eternitatis, right, from up there. No, Marx proposes the following, that we imagine, he says, assume the position of a third party. So think as if from a position of a third party that is looking at the thing. So obviously you are not that third party. That third party is some sort of a human third party. It's not, it's not subjectivity centered. That is, so you escape anthropocentrism by escaping subjectivity centered thinking, but you cannot escape your condition of humanity, you being human. You can just maybe test this position of looking at things from a third-party perspective. This is what he proposes. And I would say that this reminds me of Aristotle's understanding of mimesis. In his Poetics, he explains that not only arts, any form of knowledge is acquired through mimesis. Or mimesis, how do you pronounce it in English? So this is the third party perspective, which helps us move away from subjectivity-centered thinking and assume that position of a third party perspective. Then I go into a more detailed discussion of this, and then I come again to the question of atomists. I think, I don't know, it would be too much to go there, but if you want me, I can continue. I will skip 2 passages and I will continue. Let's go back to the ancients. So Aristotle divulges these inconsistencies of the Eleatic proposal in terms of its categories and logic, and thus demonstrates that the collapse of human reasoning, application of categories, and being itself is a fallacy. So he does not speak of, similarly to literal, except the literal speaks of the real, and Aristotle speaks of being and categories. So you cannot collapse them. They're not the same thing. Aristotle says categories will always be here as our organon, but being or reality or it's out there. So they're not, and they will never be the same thing. So here, Aristotle in these passages is really different from the rest of this history of philosophy. So by distinguishing ousia from quantity, quality, location, and time, Aristotle demonstrates that predication is always about a certain something, as there is and as there is a practically endless and unbound multiplicity of possible predications, there is thus a multiplicity of ousia. And he does say this in his metaphysics. The being, put simply, is always said in plural. Metaphysics, to on, to haplos legomenon legete polachos. Was it good, Alexandra? As part of the, okay, the law was very Slavic, but I'll try next time. So as part of the elaboration of this argument, Aristotle examines possible contradictions, inconsistencies, and paradoxes in how the human mind might work, or in the way one speaks, as he says, and in the only possibly credible modes of speech that make sense, not in being itself. So he is not problematizing things there, like Parmenides, like everybody following this tradition. He actually does what the analytic philosophy would do, what Wittgenstein has done in a way. He examines how we use language, and if this is the correct way of using language, and the technique of dialectique, which is logic. You always use dialectics in Hegelian sense, but it's logical reasoning in Aristotle. So human language reflects the consistency of reality and the outside world. To him, there is this link. But the latter seems to be in and of itself foreclosed, also in Aristotle's words. I will quote him in a bit. And accessible only to the degree to which our categorical system and logic are developed. If one runs against the wall of contradiction, it is due to a problem in human reasoning, not problem of being, not of the outside world. The reality is not paradoxical. We have some bug in the way in which we reason. This is what Aristotle argues. So it is due to a problem in human reasoning, not problem of being, of the outside world, of the real, whose essence evades human mind. In physics, Aristotle writes, one could not easily put motion and change and in another genus. This is plain if we consider where some people put it. They identify motion with difference or inequality or not being, becoming, but such things are not necessarily moved. So you see, he's precise around the categories. He says these things, difference, inequality, not being or becoming, none of this is necessarily moved. So why do you equate them? So this is really going directly against the Eleatics, and there's strong authority at the time. So furthermore, here I argue this is also in physics. So some say that the void is the matter of the body. They identify the place too with this, and in these they speak incorrectly. So they speak incorrectly. For the matter is not separable from things, but they are inquiring about the void as about something separable. Except as an abstract category, one cannot speak of matter in general as a distinct ontic entity, just as one cannot speak of the void in such fashion either. Thus, the Eleatic impossibility is refuted by Aristotle on the grounds on one thus speaks incorrectly. Aristotle examines the organon, this instrumentarium of rational reasoning and its rules, and its possibilities and its shortcomings of the era of his era, in order to make the account of that which is to own, as well of that which is not possible. That which is not negation of being, but rather of a particular ousia, of a something, that which is not and which could become, is still not nothingness. And nothing indeed comes from nothing, but it is a particular ousia, a certain something. So he opens up the possibility to think motion. And I will wrap up here. There is no time to show you. This is long and boring. This is already philology. I can send you the paper. What follows is a bunch of passages from different atomists that Aristotle discusses. There is more of a different nature in the same chapter, but the point here was to open these questions, and with the help of Aristotle, who is basically just a critic of, the Eleatics and then the atomist, and as this commentator of both, in a way, through the application of this his organon, opens up the possibility to think movement while not violating the principle of nothing comes from nothing. So in a way, and this kind of displays or discloses the fact that philosophy is always to a degree a certain ideology, because he had to keep the unmoved mover there. There must be something unmoved for it to be serious philosophy. But in these passages where he's not that serious of a philosopher, but sounds more like a philosopher of physics or physicist, he does manage to both logically and in terms of physical argument, like in the sense of the science of physics, to open up the possibility to think logically consistently the possibility of transformation, change, and movement. And as you can imagine, we are quoting it further on, but there's no time.
I have a bunch of questions. I'll just do one, which is I was wondering, kept thinking you were going to come around to protegule, the passages about protegule and the description there, because that's a place where in Aristotle where I kind of feel the most connection with his work and what he's talking about, because he says, and it's a short passage. I don't want to say that it's from the physics or there's a section in the metaphysics, but it's really only like one. It's in the metaphysics, but it's like just 1 or 2 pages, because he throws it out pretty quick, because he's like, no, this is gonna be a tough one, because it's a logon, it's a oriston, so it's unbounded, unlogifiable, and that's where we're gonna not be able to deal with this. And essentially, it's the kind of category of indeterminacy where he sort of acknowledges this thing, but then he's like, we can't work with this. What can we say about protegule? Nothing.
Yeah,
What is it?
remember that.
No, it's not it's not being, but it's not non-being. We just don't know. And that to me has always been a really interesting place in Aristotle, that he acknowledges but moves on. But I just was curious to hear your thoughts about that passage in your story.
Remember exactly the place on what you're talking about. And in my youth, I was also, like puzzled by this, that he would mention this and just move on and just talk about Hule and Hippocamenon and this protocol. What is this? And he never connects it with archai, with the principle. I don't know what to think, except this would be an attitude of a scientist. Like, they have a model, this thing works within the model, this concept works, this equation works, or as you say, it's kind of, this would be like practicing, as Laurel would put it, this scientific posture of thought. It doesn't work, and I don't know what to do with this. I can assume that there must be a protocol, but I don't know anything about it. Moving on. I don't know. I'm puzzled by by it, and this is how how I see it now. But I I may be wrong because we're both guessing. I really don't know, just like you. But I find it also very interesting.
Yeah.
He just mentions it and just move on.
And that disjunct is hard to reconcile. It's like, oh yeah, protegule, indeterminacy, unlimited, unbounded, unthinkable, and then the unmoved mover. I mean, the different texts, but still, to me, those is a weird polarity that how you reconcile these things. I don't know. Well, I mean, it's okay. We don't have to figure it out now.
That seems like, the philosophical reflex that there must be a non-moved mover, so that it's serious philosophy. Something must be unmoved. The thing that is above everything that's unmoved. Then we're serious. If everything is moving and changing, then it's just this crazy atoms. And they're not even real philosophers.
And I just want to say thank you to, I really like the whole thing. It
Thanks.
makes me feel very at home, like I'm feeling like a really nice
yeah.
anti-philosophy vibe that is really like working for me right now. So thank you for your paper.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, but I agree. I also, I just wanted to add this. I think that just as he needed to add the unmoved mover, he needed to assume that there is some protein here, something else to be protected. But it could also be interesting. What if that is, quantum sort of thing? Can you imagine back then? Whatever would be analogous to that, but who knows? Who knows? But that's interesting.
Well, to be continued.
Yeah.
This is the question of movement and its relationship to space. I think is very, very interesting because since it's like probably like one of the most crucial problems that arises out of classical mechanics, which is the problem of action at a distance. So it's like, how do you account for the fact that something is moving at? I mean, in Leibniz, we get the fact that space is not absolute, arises out of the relationality of the monad. So don't presuppose it's absolute space or absolute time to begin with. It's emerging in Leibniz. Space is emerging. In the metaphysical foundations of mechanical sciences, in Kant, he takes a similar position, but he then says, okay, well, maybe we need the thing which is called the ether, which is to say that matter is everywhere, and it's just a question of density. But in the 19th century, I think the most important thing that comes into play is the question of field. Because what the field does is it allows you to think about space both through scalar, vector, and tensor, whereby the field itself is in a kind of quasi-Kantian, quasi-kind of Aristotelian sense. It's like everywhere, but it's only an expression of those things which constitute the field. So quantum field theory is the most classical one in that respect. It's like both ontologically presupposed, so field is the only thing that exists, but the field is the expression of the particle, which is the field. And so you don't have that kind of problem of placing something into space, because it's, I suppose you have something similar in space-time as well. But yeah, just to say that problem is supposedly it's not solved, but it's what Faraday introduces when he's like, well, how are these magnets working, right? Like, how are they, so.
That's why I said at the beginning that we're still dealing in philosophy with atomistic issues, and then most of this puzzles, that still sort of plague philosophers are essentially solved by physics. And, but what you're saying is that this is also an ontological response to this. Yeah.
For example, if you take something like quantum gravity, you're trying to account for even the emergence of space-time itself. But yeah, I mean, it is. If you talk to a quantum field theory, they'll say, well, what exists is field, but they won't really give it that same status as substance. But yeah, that's what I was trying to say. But the field, in a way, kind of tries to solve this in physics.
But there is no space in quantum, or?
Sorry?
Space is not even a category in quantum physics, right?
Yeah.
So we dispense with it.
Yeah, so
but that's the interesting part. Actually, that is what I problematized at the beginning. There is an impossibility of movement because with what we do with the empty space is just detached from ousia, so there isn't any problem. Even in Aristotle, plus what you're saying, physics essentially responds to this problem. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say that it just in the quantum gravity story, that it's like you're like looking at quantum activity, just energetic levels are meant to produce a space field. But that's one thing, is that the quantum field theory leaves out time. I mean, that's the whole, Prigogine thing. I always cite my Prigogine, but he makes that whole point that quantum field theory basically doesn't have a theory, it has a reversible theory of time, which is energetically wrong. I mean, that doesn't exist. There's not reversible time. That's not a real thing. Anyway, I didn't have anything more.
I don't know. So, sorry. But Harry,
That was an excellent talk, really enjoyed it. And I'm not gonna comment too much on the I guess the quantum debate we walked into, other than saying most quantum physicists and computationalist information theorists I know typically avoid what you call philosophical or qualitative interpretations of their equations. It's not that they think it's substance, it's that question to them makes no sense because they haven't care or don't care about what philosophy has to say about substance. That could be incorrect, like on some larger scale, but just, the dancing woolly master stuff keeps coming up, and most quantum physicists do not read the dancing masters. Now, I do think there's something really interesting going on, where I think in Greece, ancient Greece in particular, there was assumed, and this kind of stuck around in philosophy, to be some like fidelity between language and reality, right? And then the famous refutation of that was actually Wittgenstein. Right? So Wittgenstein, well, actually, all these philosophical problems you have, like does movement exist? What is the void? These are just language games. They're misuses of language, which lead to confusion. You can make evolutionary or social arguments for that if you want. But then the problem with Wittgensteinian arguments, it tends to lead to political conservatism. You see an analytic philosophy, right? So or at least some form of quietism. And Marx, I think you correctly pointed out, did kind of push against that. So Marx is trying to do some form of anti-philosophy or non-philosophy, depending on what term you prefer. But then it seems like Marx himself also hits a limit, right? So Marx himself, he does a great critique of Hegel and stuff, but one of the reasons is, why did the socialist project to some extent fail in the Soviet Union? You could make one story to it. One reasonable explanation, I think, would be that Marx himself and his successors never went beyond a kind of metaphysics or ontology of the political economy in the capitalist framework. So it's a critique of capital. There's nothing saying what the post-capitalist, non-capitalist, or anti-capitalist world look like. And I think so. Therefore, I do think it's valuable to go back to take a look at these questions. And the real question is: do you think that a kind of return to looking at the pre-Socratic philosophers, it seems to be like the implicit hypothesis here, and maybe Laurel or Quanta or whatever, could that be a formulation which actually goes beyond the kind of ontology of capital or transhumanism or whatever it is that we're currently aiming for? And if so, could we be a little bit more explicit about that and try to think, what is it that could be that is useful here? So I think Deleuze is trying to go there, arguably just to make it all the way. What do you think is the current path?
Well, it's an entire book that I've written on this question, and John wrote the preface. Well, I'm assuming this is what you're suggesting, that maybe I'm assuming wrong, that some sort of a critique of philosophy, of this foundational tenets, what constitutes philosophy as a form of thought, could be used as for a critique of what constitutes capitalism as thought, right? Yes, I agree, but there is an entire book I wrote on that, and it's I don't know, too long to retell it, but yes, it's the same principle, the same logic, the same dialectic of the same dichotomy between mind and body, the same contempt toward the material, the same contempt toward vulgar materialism, such as mechanistic or empirical materialism, etc., etc. So there are many correspondences there, and like, I don't know, a few months ago in Venice, in Berggruen Institute, Venice. I gave a talk on that, and it infuriated many people that I equated philosophy with capitalism. But yes, I agree. We can talk more about that later. Yeah, I share the same view.
Yeah, can I remember?
You can just
No, later,
Vera
later.
has
I just
been
wanted to follow up on that, but like,
Vera.
No, but please do stay in the room. I'm sure it's more vivid for you. And if there is time in the end, I can still ask my question. I will not forget. I don't want to interrupt your beautiful discussion.
She's supposed to see the room,
No,
not me.
the room.
It is vivid. Yeah.
yes, I don't mean to
Now
interrupt. Please keep the discussion in your room. And if there is time, I will join in from outside. But it was very nice to follow. I can ask later. That's what I was going to
you
say.
always have some criticism for me, Vera. Just cheering. Okay, later. Yeah. Okay. So
No, somebody else.
Oh. I was just curious also about this question of language, this that if human language reflects the consistency of reality. I'm just wondering what do you think the role of language might be in keeping up the appearance of this consistency of reality? That it made me think about like John's car, like it, it is changing inside, but it appears to be it's the same. Like it appears to freeze time in a way, and I'm wondering if like
I'm, like Saussurian here. I think it's, I have this structuralist view on language. So, it's a certain type of mechanism. It's an automaton, as Saussure argued, as Saussure taken up by the structuralist, post-structuralist Lacan, right? This is all Saussure. So it is completely arbitrary what sound you choose to signify a thing. It is completely arbitrary and then context and even materially dependent how you differentiate one sound from another. Like, I don't know, you cannot have these and these vowels next to each other. You must have a consonant, or for example, R and L liquids, these consonants, they can do the function of vowels. So we will place them here so that we have a root of a word. So it's pure mechanics, like his car. So language to me is that, and it's no direct reflection of reality whatsoever. It's a pure technology of mediation. So now, because we think that is us, well, you have Derrida, and what was his doctoral thesis? Phonemen, voice and phenomenon. Yeah. He speaks there, the grammatology issues from there. He speaks there of the fact that there is no authentic voice, authentic talk. There is no authentic, I don't know, speech of Socrates and his truth. That's already scripture. That's already writing. That's already, like putting signs on the sand, except you do it vocally. So this is how I see language, and this is why Saussure is and his appearance on this intellectual scene of Western civilization is so revolutionary. This is the first theory of language where no one seeks for a direct reflection link between reality and language, and nor there is a direct link between our authentic selves. That's why I mentioned voice and phenomenon. Yeah, that was the title. Yeah. There is no such thing. Because that is the only means through which we express ourselves. We almost place our true selves in language, in our expression, but hence the sense of alienation from language. Even, like in the Freudian sense, the pleasure principle, the automaton of signification, is a place where you sense alienation because it creates the illusion of authenticity, as the ancient philosophers believed, and no, even the contemporary ones believed in some sort of organicity, purity, anti-mechanicity, etc. So it creates this sense of authenticity and immediacy. But no, everything is mediated, and in this laborious, tedious, mechanical way, through the material process of signification. That is language to me. So comparing it to the car, I would compare it that way. Yeah. You?
Yeah, I just want to come on the structure stuff, which is my other question was it's very similar to this. Can you give a mechanical account of mechanism without being rational? Which would be the question to say, but can you induce all forms of heuristics from matter itself, or do you have to somehow start with some regulative ideas like causality, for example, or quantity, quality, which are seemingly prior, transcendental. And so the other one would be in Derrida, it's mechanistic, sure, but the very function of language is difference insofar as the relation, it's the temporal distancing.
Okay, but
Which
is so serious.
Of course, but the reason why it's most structures. Yeah, but the first principle was serious that no singular term is in and of itself its own term that differentiates from another term, right? But but that the point that Derrida points out is it's the difference itself, right? It's not just that there's a mechanical set of different terms.
Yeah, because he also is different.
Sure. But I mean, how would you respond to that? Because that's Derrida is not agreeing that it's a mechanical structure.
Yeah, I know. That's why I said to say. But yeah, he does that, and it's the same thing as the difference difference in Deleuze and his difference in repetition. I do have an issue with that because it just becomes this self-sufficient universe in which you inhabit or not, and everything is different, and whatever is inexplicable through this lens is just thrown out. This is precisely, the tyranny of ontological thinking that we find in philosophy, whereas science is more free, science is more open. Science allows for some questions to be unfinished or open and never answered. So I agree with that, but I don't know why you're implying that by saying things are mechanistic, that I'm saying things are not rational.
No,
you cannot be mechanically precise or.
Is there a rationality which is to say empirical? So, for example, can you do everything through induction? So, are you just a human? See what I mean? Or are there?
You can, but to a degree, and then you're just playing out. Through induction.
Yeah, because if you are to account for mechanism through something that isn't empirical, which I would say there is a principle like causality, right, or totality or quantity.
But it's not always induction. It does not have to be induction, just because it goes through the empirical. Because it's not an accumulation of empirical data, and then you come to some sort of a realization. In both Saussure, Marx, who else? Never mind, the atomists. There is observation, there is some sort of extrapolation of a pattern. So there is some sort of an abstraction of this process. It stems from a material process, but it's not reducible to the materiality that it stems from. I can quote Saussure to illustrate what I mean. So that's why you cannot either reduce it to induction or deduction. It's just somewhere else, this the type of reasoning or between the two. For example, Saussure says there is no P, like there is no P like with capital letter P, ideal P. There is P with the signs for bigger and smaller, how do you call them? This imperfect P's, the sound of P, donem P. So there is, let's say, there's all types of P. And there is this perfect phoneme P. But he says, but we have extracted this ideal P out of observing this bigger, smaller types of P. And hence, it is not a thing in and of itself. And then he triumphantly declares, we have finally moved away from the abstraction, and from the concrete, we have arrived back to the abstract. So, it's more like this movement than induction. Is it induction necessarily? Or say Claude Lévi-Strauss, is it induction?
That's an empirical concept, whereby you're like, anyway, we could carry this.
Yeah, okay. Vera, okay.
Okay, gladly. It actually connects, I think, connects to this discussion perhaps a bit. I liked a lot following your thoughts, Katarina. Great. And your motto for mechanics and the complexity of it and all of it's so interesting how you are coming to these similar attentions, which are so difficult to make today in lines that I don't know, I'm not familiar with, like you are. So this is fantastic. There is one point which for me is a bit at the core where I always where I would be very curious how you think of it. So when you were mentioning this kind of the way of bypassing the inevitable anthropocentrism with the third perspective, the third person perspective. No, so
Yeah.
I have been kind of coming to this point also in many times from many directions, and where it kind of crystallizes. I'm not sure whether this is the case in how you approach it as well, but crystallizes is that then on the one hand, with this third person perspective, either we have a kind of a formalistic play of meta levels, where there are observers just multiplied, but disembodied or like generalized, I don't know, which to me is not satisfactory really, because it's a question of, so how can we share the insight? So the beauty of a mechanism is that everybody can perform with it, because it will work if it works. It doesn't matter who you are. And yet, it's like with instruments, there is a kind of a skill to be acquired in how to handle it. So there needs to be a kind of a sense of how this, Michel Serre speaks of the third instructed, no? That this third person, which is not us. So it's a distance to us as subjects, as individuals, but it's somehow a joint formation of it or so. And then this gets so close or so quickly, so close or approximated to the Christian idea, no? That somehow where we think we are a kind of a universal subject, or a Hegelian even, an idealist history, where then we are unified again. So how do you cope with this? How do you cope with this formativeness, let's say, that somehow should apply to the third person as a gesture, an ethical commitment to what you call the scientific stance and also the non-anthropocentric stance?
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's a sort of unfinished thought in Marx, the way I finish this thought is the following. What you're raising as a question is important, and I've asked myself this. I think that what he proposes, based on the entire constellation of the arguments there, I think that we are allowed to think that we, as humans, are assuming. So with all the formative baggage that we carry, whatever constitutes us, it's us. We're not a perfect observer. We just, with all that we carry within ourselves, we assume and mime the position of a third party. Imagine that we're this third party, not me, not you, because it's already subjective or intersubjective, so it's structurally not you, but it empirically it is you with all of your information. So you do not presume some ideal third-party perspective. You are you with all of your preconceptions, but structurally, as a posture of thought, thought that you assume, it kind of informs the glance, the way you look at things in a different, it conditions them structurally, it conditions your gaze structurally in a different way. But of course, the real human being that is doing this mimesis of a third-party perspective, I'm adding the term mimesis, Marx does not use it. Of course, you are you with all that you carry as your, if I understood correctly. You are not some idea.
But would you not say, when you, for example, have somebody who is very important for you, or structure, for this kind of structure of organizing thought, like Marx for you, no?
Yeah.
So don't you then learn mimetically to take the posture which you see instantiated by Marx as a third person in the way that he writes? So isn't then there a mimesis of a figuration of thought that is...
I see what you mean.
Yeah, so a kind of a mimesis in how one moves. This is where I was with the choreography and the dance and so on, or the figure. So the tropic space needs to be with the... So not a visual image where we would have a representational relation, but a kind of a performative and affective.
Yeah, you imagine how a neutral third-party perspective would look at it. That's what you mean.
Yes,
yeah,
in a way. And then how to prevent it from not just becoming ideal subjects.
I agree, there is a problem there. It's not an ideal solution. Paula. Well, Max is here also. Yeah, I agree. There are some problems there, precisely the problems you point out. But for now, I choose to be satisfied with what Marx proposes. It is the following. He says, we're miming the position of a third party insofar as we look at ourselves and the others as objects among objects. So,
Yes, that's what there goes to as well.
Kind of a modest response, not a very ambitious thought, but kind of works. It's better than the other types of objectivism. Yeah. So,
and then
I see point that there is discussion there, Joe.
Yeah, and then this depends on the coupling between what you call ontologizing and space, as the empty space. Yeah, this I see.
Yeah.
And I think so. This was a bit my interest to link, because I think there is something to be won with this figure in Proclus about it's so the unmoved mover, yes, but not as a subject, but it's in Greek this kinesis akinetos, no? So a motionless motion or a static activity, which then has always been interpreted as spiritual motion. And this somehow It's very interesting to me because there is a whole process of elementarizing this motion. This is in the elements of theology then in Proclus, which is the beginning really of theology, and parallels the elements of geometry in Euclid as a process to kind of neither go to the nous nor to a purely mechanistic point of unmoved mover or initial causation. But I also don't have a conclusion to all of this. It's just, it was beautiful.
Yeah.
Movements.
I mean, but it's an interesting point for further conversation.
Yeah, thanks a lot.